Your Name, also known as Kimi no Nawa, was a 2016 blockbuster taking the animation world by storm by becoming the best-selling animation movie of all time. It dethroned the long-lasting 2001 masterpiece Spirited Away, made by the legendary animation director Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli. But how did Your Name, and how did its director Makoto Shinkai, end the 15-year reign which Spirited Away had on the animation world internationally? And why do so many people love Your Name to this day? What makes Your Name so special? Is it the amazing animation, the landscape shots of Tokyo versus the Japanese countryside? Is it the music, the perfect soundtrack with 4 amazing songs that really captures the essence of the movie? Is it the intriguing storyline of body switching between a boy and a girl mixed with playful comedy? Or is it more than that? Is there more to this simple star-crossed lovers movie? For me, this movie definitely changed my life. I became a different person once the credits rolled. No other story so far has left me with that same feeling of longing which still lingers 9 years later. And I wonder if that's the same for many of you too. That's why it's my favourite movie, let alone my favourite anime. The story itself follows Mitsuha, a polite countryside high school girl burdened with her family's traditional Shinto priesthood duties, who wishes one day to leave her simple and small town Itomori to move to the big city of Tokyo, versus Taki, who is simply just a normal high school Tokyo boy, but after experiencing the body switching, he's able to explore himself, but also the beautiful rural areas of Itomori. Like most of the audience, for the lucky ones who survived until the end, you're left feeling a bit bittersweet. Even though the film's finished, you're left feeling incomplete, a void which you can't seem to fill in. It got to the point for me where I watched the movie again and again in the English dub, then the English sub to notice the differences. I started to go further, learning Japanese to find the missing pieces in the original Japanese content. In terms of Your Name's content, there's obviously the original movie, but then there's also the novel and the manga. But on top of that, there's also the spin-off called Earthbound, which also comes as a novel and a manga. So in this video, I'll explain the whole storyline, discuss all the criticisms, and explore all the inspirations of Your Name, since these additional pieces pack a lot more information than just a standalone movie. So what did I learn? Well, first of all, we have to make sure we're all on the same page. So what a better place to start than, well, the start. So the story begins with Miyamizu Mitsuha and her life, and in her words, it's too cramped, too isolated, trains barely come by, there's no jobs, no dating prospects, but most importantly, there's no cafe. Luckily though, Mitsuha does have 2 amazing friends, Teshi and Sayaka. Whilst Teshi and Sayaka are concerned about how oddly Mitsuha was acting yesterday, we're interrupted with a glimpse of her strict father Toshiki and her 3 classmate bullies giving her some rude remarks. We're then introduced to the Miyamizu family history and how its records were burned away 1,000 years ago in a great fire. It's then revealed to the audience that her father, the one who just scolded Mitsuha in public, left her, her sister Yotsuha, and her grandma Hitoha to run for mayor of Itomori. At this point, we the audience have seen enough of what Mitsuha has to endure in Itomori. Sayaka and Teshi aptly put it, Mitsuha is the star of the show. And tonight's show shows us the traditional Miyamizu Kagura dance. In the Earthbound spin-off novel, it's said that these Kagura practice sessions are 3 hours long. We see her perform this dance in front of Itomori citizens. Part of the ceremony includes creating kuchikamizake, a alcoholic rice drink where the same 3 bullies make snark remarks again. In the novel, Mitsuha even mentions it's better if Teshi and Sayaka don't even come to watch the ceremony at all. And it's at this breaking point that Mitsuha wishes to be a good-looking Tokyo boy in her next life. Well, lucky for her, she didn't have to wait for her next life for that to happen. We're then introduced to Taki, but uniquely through the lens of Mitsuha. Mitsuha in Taki's body falls off the bed when trying to turn off the morning alarm clock. There's great attention to detail here because the reason she falls off the bed is because she's used to sleeping on the floor on a futon back in Itomori. We then get to see the first glimpse of Tokyo in the movie, showing real Tokyo buildings. Another great touch here is Mitsuha twirling her hair in a feminine way in Taki's body. We're then introduced to Taki's amazing friends, Takagi and Tsukasa, who, after seeing Taki forget his lunch, improvise a croquette egg sandwich. They ask if they want to go to a cafe after school. Mitsuha, who's never been to a cafe, let alone one in Tokyo, jumps at the opportunity, but is swiftly interrupted by a notification for Taki's part-time shift. Mitsuha, who's working Taki's part-time restaurant shift, experiences two swindlers trying to get a free meal. Flustered by the altercation, she's swiftly saved by another key character, Okudera. Feeling indebted to Okudera, Mitsuha returns the favour by sewing her skirt that was cut. Yesterday, Taki got into a fight, hence the bandage on his face, but today Mitsuha shows a more feminine touch which pleases Okudera. The following day, Okudera calls Taki Taki-kun, but why is this so important? Well, Japan uses honorifics when calling someone by their name. In general, most people fit inside the san zone. You can hear this in Oto-san and Oka-san, with Yotsuwa here referring to her dad and her mom. On top of that, the O is also an honorific, so it just goes to show the level of respect used in the Japanese language, using honorifics at the front and at the end. But there's also a no honorific zone which you can use with family. Usually it's with the parents to their children or sibling to sibling. For example, here, Hitaha calls her grandchildren by their name only, which is perfectly fine. In the Earthbound spin-off, there's a scene where Taki in Mitsuha's body calls Yotsuha Yotsuha-chan, which she sort of cringes at. The relationship between the sisters is so close that it's ironically weird if you start using honorifics, kind of like saying please and thank you with your own siblings or close friends. Senpai is another honorific, usually used towards your senior within your own age range. Hence, Mitsuha and Taki's body gets scolded for not calling Okudera Senpai here. But the honorific kun is really interesting. It's not really used, but when it is, it's usually between two guys. However, there is a unique opportunity for girls to refer to guys in a respectful but intentional way, which pretty much means you're more than just a friend. It's almost like the opposite of the friend zone. It's the I'm interested in you zone or you're important to me zone, to which Taki's colleagues get even more annoyed at when Okudera says Taki-kun. And just to note, throughout the movie when we hear Mitsuha say Taki, don't you remember? She's saying Taki-kun, oboete nai. So she's also using the kun honorific. So now you know why Okudera and Mitsuha calling Taki Taki-kun is important. Also, there's a difference in the manga with Okudera. She actually has light hair rather than black. We don't know the exact colour, but it's most likely blonde and it's an interesting change. What follows from this point on is Mitsuha and Taki regularly switching bodies every 2 to 3 days and having to adapt to this new phenomenon to keep their lives in control. It's pretty funny, innocent and simply fun. In the novel, Mitsuha's first body switch experience was so vivid that she starts imagining how she can make it into a manga. She even mentions that if she's bad at drawing, then she can become an author instead and sell the books to make enough money to move into Tokyo with Teshi and Sayaka. Previously, we saw basketball shots at Taki's school. In contrast, Taki in Mitsuha's body starts outperforming everyone in basketball PE class. In Earthbound, it's confirmed that Taki's good at basketball because he used to play for a team in middle school. Taki doesn't know how to put on a bra, so we get shots like these. He's oblivious to why the guys are watching and staring. Sayaka scolds Taki for making these female etiquette errors and starts to grow tired of scolding him again and again in the Earthbound spin-off. But she's a friend and she's worried about her new behaviours. When everyone in class starts laughing at Mitsuha for successfully remembering her name, it's only Sayaka that shows a face of concern. In Earthbound, Taki feels like he talks very unnaturally in comparison to Mitsuha's Itomori accent. He tries to mimic her, repeating how she speaks, which Yotsuha occasionally overhears. In Earthbound, there's a specific scene where the three bullies start gossiping out loud, mentioning a Ohime-sama, which is like her highness or a mademoiselle. They start saying how weird it is for making kuchikamizake. I mean, the whole class can hear the whole conversation, to the point where Sayaka starts getting irritated and Teshi actually gets up from his seat furiously. But Taki and Mitsuha's body stops him before anything happens. Taki himself gets up and actually speaks to the buddies themselves, probing them and saying, "Oh, what did you say was so weird?" To which they stay completely silent. He then says, "From this point on, it's better for you to shut up." In the movie, you'll recall the scene where Teshi tricks Sayaka and Mitsuha into going to a cafe when really it's just a vending machine. Well, one key plotline in the Earthbound spin-off is Teshi surprising them to make a cafe. Essentially, what he wants to do is make that vending machine a cute cafe spot for the three of them. Sayaka questions whether anyone will get angry because this is someone's land, to which Teshi replies that this is the land of a late sweet shop owner. Since he passed away, the sweet shop and the land surrounding it was abandoned, but because he was friendly with Teshi, he's certain that he wouldn't mind them building a cafe here. On that day, however, it's Taki in Mitsuha's body, in which Taki gets really hands-on with the sawing. He lifts up his legs, exposing the underside of Mitsuha's skirt, which again Sayaka shouts out. Taki calls Yotsuha to bring him some trousers so he can freely soar, which is actually shown in the movie, albeit very, very briefly. In exchange for Yotsuha bringing Taki some trousers, he says he'll buy some Haagen-Dazs ice cream for her. He says, "Don't worry, I'll buy it and leave it in the fridge and you can eat it whenever you want," hoping that it'll fall on a day where Mitsuha is in her own body. On another day, Yotsuha actually goes and eats the ice cream. She feels a little guilty about it, knowing that Mitsuha likes it so much, so she confirms it before with her sister. Well, on that day, it's Taki in Mitsuha's body again, so he says, it's okay to eat it, which Taki sort of sees as a revenge on Mitsuha, who keeps eating and spending his money at the cafe. But the following day, Mitsuha's back in her own body and sees that her ice cream's gone. She runs over to Yotsuha all defeated and questions, why did you eat it? Mitsuha says to herself that it's her vital life energy being taken away from her. Yotsuha says, "You said it was okay yesterday," which then confuses Mitsuha, but she leaves and then proceeds to sulk for the rest of the day. Yotsuha realizes that despite Mitsuha's anger, she never really gets angry at Yotsuha herself and never gets revenge on her. This is why when Mitsuha oversleeps, which is Taki, and forgets to make breakfast, Yotsuha lets her off and makes it on her behalf. Another plotline in Earthbound is Yotsuha notices that Mitsuha usually cooks traditional Japanese food, but sometimes she'll cook Western food. Yotsuha wonders how Mitsuha could learn this and why would she learn this. Maybe it's because she's learning to cook for a boy, but she also knows that Itomori doesn't really have local universities and questions whether Mitsuha is actually cooking for an older man instead. And maybe that older man is deceiving Mitsuha. Maybe Mitsuha's the person the older man is having an affair with. From Yotsuha's perspective, it feels like a sitcom scenario that you would see in the TV, but her elementary school level thinking sort of limits her imagination up to here. When Yotsuha runs to Mitsuha to question her, Mitsuha turns around and just for a moment, Yotsuha sees her mom in Mitsuha. Yotsuha in her mind mentions that she doesn't really have any memories of her mom at all. She only knows what she looks like through photographs and that she passed away before she could even make memories of her. She wonders what kind of person her mom would be, but in that moment, Yotsuha is stunned and she ends up not questioning Mitsuha about that possible affair scenario. Yotsuha stands stunned for a while, to which Mitsuha says, "Well, since you look free, come and help chop some vegetables in the kitchen." And in that moment, Yotsuha felt like she was helping her mom in the kitchen, which is kind of sad but also sweet. Earlier in the movie, you'll recall Teshi's dad telling him to work at the construction site on the weekend. In the Earthbound manga, Teshi and Taki and Mitsuha's body coincidentally meet at the construction site. Taki ends up getting lost and Teshi spots Mitsuha on the footpath. When Teshi first approaches her, he notices Mitsuha's sketching and wonders since when did she have hobbies, and when did she start having this drawing hobby in particular. It's kind of sad when you realise that Mitsuha has no time for herself in her life to even have hobbies. In the manga, Mitsuha in Taki's body has longer conversations with Taki's dad. When you think about it, Mitsuha can't really have these conversations with her own dad, which is probably why she speaks to Taki's dad more often and in a loving way. Teshi and Sayaka are always concerned when Mitsuha shows up without tying her hair properly. This is because in the novel, the reason Mitsuha is so diligent on tying her hair with a kumihimo ribbon is because her mom taught her how to. There's even a scene where Mitsuha ties Yotsuha's hair when she's feeling unwell in the Earthbound manga. In one of the movie diary entries, Taki says how delicious Grandma Hitaha's bento was. And finally, we're back to the main movie plotline where Mitsuha sets up a date with Okudera. Taki is obviously surprised because he knows he couldn't pull that off. When he meets her at the bridge, he mentions how Okudera looks like someone from Miss Japan in the novel, and it's at this point in the story the whole mood changes. Taki and Okudera's date ends up a disaster, with Taki trying to call Mitsuha. Unfortunately, the holder of the number no longer exists. Before Mitsuha turns up to the autumn festival, Sayaka teases Teshi in the movie about Mitsuha, saying it would be a new opportunity to see Mitsuha in a new kimono. Teshi says Mitsuha's voice sounded really sad, in which Sayaka swiftly says, "Oh, it's because you hung up the phone." But importantly in the novel, one of Mitsuha's rules for Taki is to not get involved romantically with Teshi and to keep Teshi and Sayaka together. But you can also see Sayaka's true feelings at the Miyamizu ceremony earlier in the movie. Initially, Sayaka looks sad, but once Teshi shows up, she's actually smiling. When Mitsuha finally shows up, Teshi and Sayaka are shocked at her new hair. They say, "Kamiga," and it's actually a double entendre. Kami can mean god or it can mean hair. So Teshi is kind of saying, a god or your hair. Also, there's a hammering scene at the autumn festival stalls, and it leaves an indent. I mean, they didn't need to add that indent, but they did, and I respect that level of detail, honestly. But believe it or not, this is the day that Mitsuha, Yotsuha, Hitoha, Teshi, Sayaka, and the rest of Itomori are wiped out. The body switching stops, and Taki starts to worry. In the novel, he wonders whether Mitsuha is ill with a fever or a temperature. As time passes by, he tries to materialize what he can remember. We actually see him draw the same building as he did in Mitsuha's body. You can see the verses here. Several sketches later, he prepares to visit Mitsuha himself, skipping school and his part-time shift. Before leaving, he ties the kumihimo Mitsuha gave to him 3 years ago, but by this time he forgot who gave it to him. Taki plans on going alone, but Tsukasa and Okudera end up tagging along. We have some pretty comfy shots of the three travelling together, but Taki can't seem to find the place he's looking for. As fate has it, just as the three prepare to pack it up and head back to Tokyo, the lady at the ramen restaurant recognises Taki's sketch, and with the approval of an Itomori man, Taki's sketch is confirmed to be one of Itomori. We've actually seen these ramen restaurant owners before. They're the same couple speaking at the Miyamizu ceremony here, and the three, with the help of the Itomori man, visit Itomori. The same van that Taki, Tsukasa and Okudera take is the same van at the start of the movie during Toshiki's morning speech, as you can see here. We then learn about the comet disaster which happened 3 years ago, and Taki's note app getting divinely wiped. Upon returning and digging into local library records, the three learn that Mitsuha died on that day, and the following morning, Taki leaves on a solo mission, retracing his steps back to the Miyamizu relic shrine with the help of the same ramen shop owner. Once he finally finds the shrine and enters it, he's reminded of Mitsuha's Kuchikamizake, and after taking a sip and a slip, he's then thrown into one of the best segments of the whole movie, summarising Mitsuha's whole backstory. In the novel, Taki sees much more than what was shown in the movie. Every 1,000 years a comet falls and wipes out many people. The number of comets keep dropping and are repeated over and over again. Every time a comet drops, many people die. If you notice where the land the relic shrine is, it's actually a meteor crater. The same goes for the Itomori lake. The constant comets and destruction that Taki sees is then interrupted by the sound of a baby crying. This similar kind of dream state after drinking Kuchikamizake is also experienced by Yotsuha in the Earthbound spin-off. From Yotsuha's perspective, it's strange how rice can become alcohol, and very innocently, like an elementary schooler would, questions why everyone doesn't just simply become drunk after eating rice. Well, curiosity gets the better of her and she actually goes and tries the Kuchikamizake. Immediately she runs to the sink, spits it out and rinses her mouth with water, but later that day, Yotsuha actually has her traditional Kagura dance practice, like we mentioned, is 3 hours long. Just as she begins practicing though, with her grandma, she actually gets lost in the dance. She feels like she's drifting in the middle of water, not rising nor sinking. And all of a sudden, she sees this radiant woman in front of her. In her words, she's too old to be her cousin, but too young to be her mom. What's actually happening here is she's being taught the traditional Kagura dance by one of her ancestors. She realizes she's been transported to Itomori 1,000 years ago. When she wakes up though, to her grandma in front of her grandma asks her if Yotsuha's okay, to which Yotsuha just brushes it off. So that transportation started and finished in just a moment. Once Yotsuha begins dancing however, Hitoha is shocked at her movement and asks where she learned this from. Hitoha figures that some things must get passed down eventually, and that Yotsuha's movement reminded Hitoha of her great-great-grandma. Yotsuha then reveals her experience and says how lively it was in her dream. Hitoha says how lonely she was back then, and then Yotsuha reassures her grandma, telling her not to worry as she is with her. The following morning, Yotsuha has a dream of when she was a baby. Her mom is holding her in her hands and her dad and Mitsuha are around. Her dad is reciting a Shinto prayer. Yotsuha sees a young girl continuously stare back at her. Her dad wishes for peace and for Yotsuha to not bear pain alone. After the prayer, her mom says she'll never be lonely because Miyamizu priestesses are never alone. When she wakes up that morning, Yotsuha is really groggy. It's the same morning where Yotsuha feels unwell that Mitsuha helps tie her hair the same way their mother taught them to. In the manga, during Taki's Kuchikamizake dream, Taki sees an extended version of the hospital scene with young Mitsuha and Yotsuha with their mom Futaba. It's here where Futaba gives Mitsuha her kumihimo, the same kumihimo that Mitsuha wears on a daily basis going forward, and which she eventually gives to Taki at the very start of the movie. The fact that this kumihimo was Futaba's is really important later on. but it also shows how much Mitsuha values Taki to give away her late mom's kumihimo to him. Taki then awakens, entering Mitsuha's body one final time on the day the comet is about to fall. There's still time to save everyone in Itomori. In the novel, once Hitoha mentions the dreams Miyamizu women have and that she experienced them herself, Taki concludes that the reason for the body swapping is to avoid the damage from the comet disasters, almost like a bloodline warning system that only Miyamizu women carry. When Taki warns people of the comet falling, no one believes him. Hitoha doesn't deny what Taki's saying, but more so that no one else will believe that. When Taki says everyone will die tonight in the classroom, the movie just shows a shocking reaction, but Sayaka and Teshi pull Mitsuha outside into the corridor and grill her in the novel and the manga. But since they're such good friends, they believe Taki in Mitsuha's body, and the three of them devise a grand plan. Previously, we saw Teshi's bedroom full of radio transmitters and receivers, so it's no wonder that they plan on hijacking the village speakers. Mitsuha has the big task of convincing her dad and mayor of Itomori, Toshiki, that a comet is falling tonight. As you'd expect from the stubborn father, it doesn't go to plan for Taki. Just after Taki assaults Toshiki and leaves the government office is the start of Toshiki's backstory in the Earthbound spin-off, and his chapter reveals so much more about Mitsuha's parents. In Earthbound, Toshiki, Mitsuha's father, starts his story 20 years prior. Before marrying, his name was Mizuguchi Toshiki versus now Miyamizu Toshiki. Both his surnames have a water reference. Miyamizu roughly translates to sacred water, whereas Mizuguchi literally means guttermouth, to put it bluntly. Toshiki comes to Itomori to understand more about the place's priestly practices as an academic researcher. He stumbles across Hitoha and Futaba. Futaba reveals how Itomori lost its history due to a great fire, but there was a spoken folklore story that the kumihimo ribbons that Itomori create were once used to tie down a great dragon. They both agree that the dragons don't exist, but the dragon must be a metaphor for something. Toshiki is actually the first one to bring up the fact that the dragon could be a comet, since the old books about Itomori mention star gods. He's even the first to point out that Itomori Lake is actually a meteor crater. Futaba is really intrigued by Toshiki's hypothesis and asks to hear more about it. She wishes this could be written down and documented, but since she's so busy with the shrine's festivities, she has no time. Toshiki offers to not only document it, but also digitalize it, to which Futaba is delighted. As the day grows old, Toshiki begins to head out, and Futaba pretty much says for some reason she feels like she wants to marry him. Toshiki, taken aback, smiles it off. But he does come back to help document Itomori's history with Futaba. Toshiki spends more time with Futaba in Itomori, speaking with the locals who say that Futaba is like a goddess and has a radiance about her. Futaba even mentions that since she was a little girl, the locals came to her often for advice. On another day, Futaba offers to perform the traditional Kagura dance for Toshiki, during which Toshiki realizes that up until this point in his life, he's just been surviving. But with Futaba, he feels like he wants to actually live, and by the end of the dance, he asks to marry her. Hitoha was against Toshiki and Futaba's marriage, but compromised on letting them get married if Toshiki left his current job to take on the priesthood. In the Earthbound manga, Toshiki's own parents and boss were heavily against the marriage. When Toshiki returns back to Itomori, he shows up with just a briefcase. Futaba realizes Toshiki gave up his job and his family to marry her, and begins to cry. Toshiki replies with a hug and says, "I don't need anything else as long as I have you." Toshiki is on a business trip when Futaba's water breaks. By the time she messages him this and he returns to Itomori, he misses Mitsuha's birth. Because of the heavy rain, all the Shinkansen trains and taxis were cancelled. He ends up renting a car and driving there himself. He arrives at the hospital at dusk and the two are relieved. Toshiki asks what they should call the baby, to which Futaba says her name will be Mitsuha. Toshiki says how fitting it is, even though the name was not on their list. Whilst Mitsuha was growing up, Toshiki noticed that Mitsuha didn't have the same godly radiance as Futaba, and actually thought it was a good thing she wouldn't be tied down to the Miyamizu duties as her mother was. When Mitsuha reached elementary school, Yotsuha was born, which Toshiki didn't miss this time. In one scene when Yotsuha was 1, Futaba was teaching Mitsuha how to peel potatoes. Toshiki questions it could be dangerous. Futaba responds with, she wants to quickly teach as many things as possible to the kids. And you can sense some foreshadowing here. During this scene, Toshiki is holding Yotsuha. He mentions how his smile couldn't leave his lips the whole time. The very next sentence in the book abruptly states that Futaba dies 2 years later. Futaba refuses to go to the hospital, again saying that she has to stay at the house so she can teach Mitsuha various things. She would say to Mitsuha that she would soon have to teach Yotsuha these things too. Toshiki continued to plead with Futaba to go to the hospital, but she continued to refuse. Once Futaba's condition worsened, she had to be hospitalized and became bedridden. In the end, she said sorry. Even then, she refused to be transferred to a bigger hospital, and she says she doesn't know why. Toshiki then wonders why she keeps refusing. Maybe it's because she's refusing to live any longer. Just as Toshiki was planning on moving Futaba to a bigger hospital, he gets a call from the hospital that Futaba passed. The nurse tells Toshiki Futaba's final words, which are, "Because this is not goodbye." Toshiki says that Futaba was always right in the things she said, but for some reason this time she was wrong, because isn't death a final goodbye? The news breaks about Futaba's passing in Itomori. Toshiki gets angry at the fact that the locals who knew Futaba longer than him only calmly reacted and said that God must have needed her earlier than normal. Toshiki also gets angry at why Hitoha isn't sad or doesn't show any signs that Futaba passed away. Hitoha says this is what God wanted. In the end, Toshiki couldn't find someone to blame or bring justice to until he found that thing. It was God. It was God who betrayed Toshiki. It was God which burdened Futaba with her priestly duties. And since then, he couldn't stand being in Itomori anymore. He couldn't stand its citizens who are obsessed with God and the Miyamizu Shrine. The more he thinks about it, the more he harbours hate towards the Miyamizu Shrine, even to the point that hatred towards Futaba begins to grow. Toshiki and Hitoha begin to have heated arguments. He sees Mitsuha and Yotsuha cover their ears during these arguments, yet he continues to shout. After much arguing, Hitoha tells Toshiki to leave. When leaving, Toshiki reaches out his hands to leave with both his daughters, but Mitsuha takes a step back and shakes her head. Yotsuha hides behind her grandma. As a father, he tried to take responsibility. At the very least, he wanted to liberate Mitsuha and Yotsuha from the Miyamizu Shrine duties, but then he remembers that they too are Miyamizu women. That's when Toshiki leaves the Miyamizu house for good, with the ambition to make Itomori a better and modern place. Knowing his backstory and how he left his own family and job for Futaba, it's most likely that he couldn't leave Itomori either because he had nowhere else to go. He decided to go into politics to make real change, asking the local corporations what problems they were dissatisfied with and what resources were required to resolve the issues. He clearly mentions how using the Miyamizu name will be a massive weapon for winning the election. Once he gets into power and becomes mayor, he reflects on how he occasionally sees Mitsuha and Yotsuha. He gets frightened by how similar Mitsuha looks to Futaba, and how Mitsuha must definitely feel as though her father has abandoned her, and that Yotsuha will eventually become like this too. Here, briefly in a one-sentence chapter, Toshiki mentions that 6 years passed by like this until the day of the comet landing. Alternatively, it's worth noting here an important timeline. During the library scene where Taki is looking at the comet victims list, there's actually no mentioning of Toshiki's name. He too is a Miyamizu, but his name's not on there, which makes you realise he probably lives the worst timeline possible, losing everything which he sacrificed for, and who knows how he handled those 3 years as a lone survivor of his family. Did he return to the same researcher job, and did he return to his disapproving parents? From the movie's perspective, you really get the impression that Toshiki is a really crappy father, but with this backstory you realise he actually gave up everything to try and make things work. But when he lost the most important thing in his life, he slowly and gradually locked away his feelings, getting colder and colder by the day. Then, all of a sudden, a figure resembling his oldest daughter appears out of nowhere, assaults him and leaves. And that figure, of course, is Taki in Mitsuha's body. We're then back on track to the movie story. Taki leaves Toshiki, coming to the conclusion that only Mitsuha has the power to persuade everyone in Itomori to leave. He retraces his steps one last time back to the Miyamizu relic shrine in hopes of finding Mitsuha there in his own body. A nice detail here is you'll notice that Taki can't sit on the bike because the seat is at Teshi's height. Then Taki realizes that Mitsuha actually visited him 3 years ago, which at that point he had no idea of her. There's a little Easter egg here because you can see Taki's flashcard from 3 years ago saying Tiamat Comet, which is the same comet that falls at Itomori. Then the two actually finally meet at Katawaredoki. The term itself roughly means twilight or the breaking of the day. The term is hinted throughout the movie. Mitsuha's teacher explains it at the start, and Yotsuha mentions it when they're returning from the Miyamizu relic shrine. Mitsuha and Taki finally talk in person for the first time. Behind them is the two lakes created by two stars, which resembles an infinity sign, evoking the idea that time is limitless, and so too is the love of two star-crossed lovers. In the novel, Taki thinks to himself how fun it would be if him, Tsukasa and Takagi could meet with Mitsuha, Teshi and Sayaka. He also says to himself that he actually liked Mitsuha's hair when it was long. And here, we're all well aware of the heartbreaking pen drop, and we're brutally forced to watch Taki and Mitsuha slowly forget about each other. Before we have any time to grieve though, Mitsuha is back in her own body to finish what Taki started. Teshi and Mitsuha set the explosives off in the mountains and call Sayaka to start the evacuation announcement. In the novel, it's mentioned that Sayaka starts bawling her eyes out and talking in an extremely terrified, crying voice. Hence, in the movie, you can actually see tears in her eyes. But once the announcement starts, she's really professional. How? Well, remember the morning announcements at the start of the movie? That's actually Sayaka, which is confirmed to be her in the novel. Teshi also mentions that she's part of the broadcasting after school club too, so that's why she pulled it off so well. With the electricity tower blown up and the announcement blasting through the speakers, the last step is Mitsuha convincing her father to make everyone evacuate. On the way running there, Mitsuha looks up to see the comet split in two. She trips and falls, and we see the famous I love you written on her hand instead of Taki's name. Just to note, what's literally written here is I like you, but in Japanese, aishiteru, which means to love, is used in much stronger terms like between husband and wife. You'll remember earlier in the movie, Mitsuha already shows us how she would write her name on Taki's palm, but Taki's left with a blurred straight line. Of all the Japanese characters, only one has a long horizontal line, which is S, and most likely what Mitsuha was trying to write on Taki's hand was the same thing he wrote on her hand, Tsukida, so she would also have written I love you too on his hand. In the book, once Mitsuha reads the I love you that Taki wrote on her palm, she says out loud that she's in love, that they're in love, and that is the reason she's no longer scared or frightened, and she actually wants to live, that she will live, that she will survive, and is certain that the two of them will meet again. In Toshiki's final chapter in the Earthbound spin-off, Hitoha and Yotsuha come to his government office saying they were told to come by Mitsuha. He then recalls Mitsuha telling him about the comet, which he initially brushed off. He then looks outside an already open window and sees a comet and it break into two. He stares at the comet and notices how it resembles something, and that something is a dragon. And he recalls how Futaba told him that it was by the Kumihimo threads that the dragon was subdued and overcome. Toshiki realizes that the threads are an allegory for humans, that it was the connections between one another that allowed Itomori to survive, and that this kind of connection with one another was inside Toshiki all along from the very beginning. Then Mitsuha actually shows up, but this time Toshiki knows it's really her. He says even if his eyes were closed, even if his ears were covered, he would know it was her. He then thinks, is it destiny that he's here in this position whilst the comet is falling, that he can make the call for everyone to survive, that he has the power and authority to make that decision. He recalls Futaba's final words, that this is not a goodbye, and how he longed to see her face just one more time, a face he knew he could never see again. But in the end, he saw a face just like hers one last time, in Mitsuha, wearing Futaba's Kumihimo that Taki returned. And he realized that Futaba was right all along, that she was always right to the very end. The aftermath of the comet falling involves many rumours and gossip about the ordeal. The novel explicitly states the coincidental disaster training drill happening when the comet was falling, that 2 hours before the impact there was a power outage and an announcement telling the locals to move to safe locations. We're then taken 8 years into the future. Taki is now a university graduate hunting for his first job in architecture. His main motivation is because he wants to create buildings which provides warmth to people's hearts, because we don't know if Tokyo will also be destroyed in the near future, similar to Itomori. In the manga, we get more of Mitsuha's life after moving to Tokyo. She too graduates from a Tokyo university, finds a job, and gets accustomed to the busy Tokyo life. She actually meets up with Teshi and Sayaka in one scene, and eats at the same restaurant Taki worked part-time at, but she just can't remember why the restaurant felt so familiar. After leaving an interview, Taki meets with Okudera. In the novel, Okudera asks to meet with Taki because she sees a billboard for the anniversary of Itomori's destruction. They both mention how neither of them remember why they went there, but they know that they went there when Taki was in high school. In the movie, we see the sparkle of Okudera's wedding ring as she waves goodbye. In the novel, it said it shined like a water drop, maybe resembling a teardrop, just not as obvious. Again, in the manga, Okudera still has blonde hair 5 years later after the comet landing. It's stated in the novel that Okudera and Taki's reunion happens in summer, then it turns to autumn, and then winter as he's drinking a cup of coffee at a cafe. As in the movie, he overhears a couple and recognises a name. It's Teshi and Sayaka, but by the time he looks back, they're already heading out the cafe. We then get the nighttime bridge crossing scene in the snow. In the manga here, Mitsuha actually gets a call from her grandma, so we know she's alive up until this point. We start seeing other characters in the future in Tokyo. We see Tsukasa in the flower shop, we see the guy bully as a cashier, we see Sayaka and Teshi house hunting, and we see Yotsuha at school. And finally, at the very end, we get to see Mitsuha and Taki reunite one last time. And that's the whole story from the movie, the manga, the novel, the Earthbound spin-off manga, and the Earthbound spin-off novel. And as you can see, there's definitely a lot more context added around the standalone movie. I hope that gives you a full picture of the story, but there's still some things I'd like to highlight here, mainly the differences between the official English and Japanese movie versions. There's one scene in the English dub that they really messed up. This is when Taki goes to the Miyamizu relic shrine and drinks the Kuchikamizake. He clearly states that this is Yotsuha's and this is mine. In Japanese, he says this is the younger sister's and this is mine. So one, they completely butchered the translation, but two, why would he remember the sister's name and not Mitsuha's name? Their names, along with their grandma, follow a similar pattern: Hitoha, Futaba, Mitsuha, and Yotsuha, which is basically 1 leaf, 2 leaf, 3 leaf, and 4 leaf in literal translation. Taki remembering the younger sister's name and forgetting the main girl's name is puzzling and just really a bad mistake. In another scene at the Miyamizu relic shrine, Hitoha explains that when you visit the shrine, you go into the netherworld, but that has connotations with the underworld and hell. In English, the more appropriate translation would be the afterlife. Again, on the voice acting, the Japanese dub is extremely good. And for the English dubbing, they did do a decent job when you compare it to other English dub shows. But Mitsuha doesn't have her countryside accent, which reduces a lot of her flair and character. The reason why the Japanese dub actors are so good is because they play both Taki and Mitsuha with a boy voice and a girl voice. But on top of that, the girl voice has a countryside accent and the boy voice has a Tokyo City accent. For the English dub actors, they kind of use a similar accent, like they're from the same neighborhood. The best way to put it is Taki's voice having like a California accent, whereas Mitsuha has like a southern Texas accent. It's that kind of difference. Also, the English cast sound a bit too old for their characters. The whole movie sounds like a bunch of adults talking when most of the characters are high schoolers. Also, the tone of Toshiki, Mitsuha's dad, is way more severe and strict in the English dub. For example, in this scene, he doesn't tell her to shut up but to be quiet. Also, Taki doesn't say "you son of a," it's more along the lines of "stop making fun of me." In actuality, Taki says to Toshiki the same phrase he says to Mitsuha when she gives him some dating advice links. In English, it was something like "do I look like an idiot" would be more appropriate. But just to summarize, the Japanese dub, there's way more respect between Toshiki and Mitsuha versus the English dub. Also, I just want to shout out Radwimps because they did a phenomenal job on the score and the singles for the movie. They did amazing scores for Weathering With You and Suzume, which are Shinkai's following movies from Your Name. But for Your Name itself, the English songs just don't hit the same way the Japanese ones do, but I still think he did a really good job. And apart from those things, I think the English dub did pretty well. Now that we understand the movie, because we have that greater context from the extra content, we can now talk about the deeper understandings of the movie itself. And there's two big themes. The first being the city versus the countryside, and the second being gender roles. Throughout the whole movie, there's a big divide between the countryside versus the big city, Itomori versus Tokyo. Mitsuha's class in the countryside is almost full, but in reality, countryside classrooms are much smaller, and the movie doesn't correctly reflect the reality of the shrinking population of Japanese children in the suburbs and countryside. In actuality, there's an increasing number of schools being closed. Moreover, recent Japanese policies have pushed people to move out of Tokyo rather than in. In 2016, and considering the upcoming 2020 Olympic Games, Your Name suspiciously shows several real-life locations like Shinjuku Station, the National Art Center, and Suga Shrine. And once you notice this, it feels a lot like Japanese marketing to the global audience. The Tokyo scenes emphasize Western influences in fashion, architecture, design, and food. There's colossal corporate skyscrapers, luxurious restaurants and cars, and it evokes the idea of business success and wealth in a modern city. To be honest, there's not a bad thing said about Tokyo in this movie, in contrast to Mitsuha and Sayaka's rant of Itomori being so confined and small. It's also worth noting here there's two main terms to describe the countryside in Japanese. They're inaka and furusato, and there's a big distinction between the two. Inaka has connotations of backward country bumpkins that need to assimilate to the modern Tokyo city lifestyle, and the latter relates to areas that need to be preserved against modernization, westernization, and urbanization. From the way Mitsuha describes Itomori throughout the film, on top of Toshiki's whole plot story of wanting to modernize Itomori, you can tell that Itomori is portrayed as that backwards, unmodernized countryside. And just to confirm it, Taki in his body swapping notes in Mitsuha's textbook labels Itomori as Inaka, specifically Do Inaka, which is the deep countryside. On top of that, he verbally says Inaka as well. There are also other subtle ways the movie divides the countryside and the city, Itomori and Tokyo. One example is how Mitsuha and Taki write. Traditional Japanese writing is vertical top to bottom and then horizontal right to left, whereas Taki, who represents modernization, writes in an English type of way, horizontal first going from left to right and then vertical top to bottom. Like we've explored before, in the city the people are shown to sleep on beds versus the countryside they'll sleep on a futon, hence Mitsuha falling off the bed in Taki's bedroom. Another example is in the first Tokyo cafe scene. Tsukasa and Takagi admire the woodwork, something that's probably rare in Tokyo with the modernized skyscrapers, whereas Mitsuha isn't fazed at all since she would be familiar with wooden buildings from Itomori. Also, the film clearly has a male fascination with the female body rather than the reverse, prioritizing male-oriented pleasure. Mitsuha's reaction to being in Taki's body is limited to one single scene, whereas Taki is seen multiple times touching Mitsuha's body throughout the movie. Even in the Earthbound spin-off manga, 2 of the 4 chapters centers around the female body, the first being Taki being unable to tie Mitsuha's bra and Yotsuha questioning why she sees her sister touch herself in the morning. The emphasis of the Miyamizu women's beauty also perpetuates the idea of how women are essentially evaluated based on their physical appearance. Futaba is presented like a goddess in the Earthbound spin-off manga, so is Mitsuha in the movie, and with Yotsuha, the 3 of them are stated as good-looking women at the Miyamizu ceremony early in the movie. As a result, it displays women from rural regions as icons that symbolize the countryside and traditional Japan. This is why Taki is almost free to express his sexual desires whilst Mitsuha's desires are denied, to depict her as a pure and innocent virgin, and that's important as well with the Kuchikamizake and the offerings to the gods. Now, contrast this with Okudera, who is good looking, dresses to the latest fashion trends, and smokes, which Mitsuha could never, since Mitsuha represents the ideal patriarchal female who is womanly and motherly. She maintains and preserves the Miyamizu traditions, cooks, cleans, and teaches Yotsuha. Just to note here, the Okudera in Japanese means inside temple with the kanji characters, which is quite ironic when you compare it to Mitsuha, who is actually inside temples. It's also worth mentioning here how Mitsuha and Taki share the burden of absent mothers. Mitsuha's mother passes away due to an illness, and Taki's mother is confirmed by Shinkai in an interview to be divorced from Taki's father. Mitsuha's life is increasingly more difficult because of her absent mother, and Taki's life exposes what a child would be if they weren't raised by their mother. Dirty dishes, late to school, half-done laundry. What ends up happening is the fathers have removed responsibility for raising children, whereas the absence of mothers is sort of presented as a crisis and disequilibrium from the expected patriarchal norms. Taki's father in this scene doesn't really care that Taki wakes up late or forgets to make breakfast for them both, nor does he care if Taki turns up late to school as long as he does turn up to school. He's quite hands-off. For example, when Taki's father mentions it was his turn to make breakfast, Mitsuha in Taki's body says sorry, and Taki's father is actually surprised to hear an apology. Contrast this with Futaba, who in the Earthbound spin-off would rather teach her daughters how to be women than to get transferred to a hospital outside of Itomori to treat her illness. So overall, despite having the potential to challenge these stereotypical gender norms with this unique gender switching storyline, Shinkai actually reinforces the status quo. And we can move on to Shinkai specifically. For example, the choice of making Mitsuha's teacher, Yuki-sensei, who is a main character from his previous movie, is quite interesting. Yuki-sensei from A Garden of Words worked in Tokyo but was burnt out and depressed, but in Your Name she ends up moving from Tokyo to the countryside of Itomori, kind of the opposite of what Mitsuha wants to do, go from Itomori to Tokyo. We know this because the same park that Taki's apartment overlooks is the exact park where A Garden of Words is set at. Another example of Shinkai referencing his previous work is shots like these, which are reminiscent of his first film, She and Her Cat. The hair tying scene, the door closing scene at Taki's apartment. You can also see train shots from A Garden of Words, which are similar to the ones in Your Name. In Shinkai's following film, Weathering with You, you can see Mitsuha and Taki making cameos, similar to how Yuki-sensei does in Your Name. Maybe we're looking a bit too deep into these decisions, since it could just be that Shinkai wants to add Easter eggs and shout out some of his previous work, but specifically the contrasting motivations of Mitsuha and Yuki for the countryside versus city is interesting. Both Yuki in A Garden of Words and Mitsuha in Your Name are burdened with their current circumstances and wish to leave them. This parallel sort of suggests that no matter where you live, the countryside or city, you can't escape the hardships of being human. Shinkai was also inspired by the red thread of destiny motif, an East Asian folklore belief that an invisible red thread ties two people who are destined for each other together. No matter how far or how long they are away from each other, they will always be connected and return back together again, transcending both time and space. You can see the red threads throughout the movie, but most obviously you can see the red thread with Futaba's Kumihimo that she gives to Mitsuha on her deathbed and which Mitsuha gives to Taki on the day before she passes away. And I guess this is what Grandma Hitoha means by musubi, or union, these divine connections between everything in this world and the afterlife. The best way to explore this simply is during the Miyamizu relic shrine visit. You can see a leaf falling off a branch now disconnects itself from the rest of the leaves and the tree itself. The tree can symbolize the tree of life where all energy in the world resides, and the leaves are us. One leaf falls away slowly on its own, breaking away on its own destination and having its own destiny. However, in the very end, it falls into a pond, which fittingly reconnects itself with all the other leaves it was once connected to. And the pond is the afterlife where all the leaves will eventually end up. Those leaves will then fade away into the pond, but that same pond and water will help rejuvenate the tree of life itself, and that cycle continues. At the end of the novel, we actually get more insight from the man himself, Shinkai, on the creation of the movie and its process. To be clear, Shinkai is the author of the novel and he says that he was writing the book whilst making the film. The final ending was finalised after the main voice actors were confirmed. He mentions how this was the first time working this way around, without a completed story first. In his words, whilst the short novel he wrote himself and finished after the movie, the finishing of the movie was pretty much a group effort by many people. Specifically the music and the score of the movie, Shinkai requested for Rad Wimps's help whilst he was writing the book and before the actors were confirmed. This new way of working without a finished ending in mind, I think, is the reason why there's so much chemistry in this movie. The acting, the aesthetics, the storyline and the music harmonise extremely well together. But there is one final glaringly obvious inspiration for this whole movie for Shinkai. We know Itomori gets destroyed, but what about real life? Well, the biggest inspiration for this movie was the 3 devastating events that occurred on the 11th of March 2011, otherwise coined as 3/11. A magnitude 9 earthquake hit the northeast coast of Japan, otherwise known as an undersea megathrust. It was the biggest recorded earthquake in Japan, but also the 4th biggest recorded in the world. Whilst the earthquake lasted 6 minutes, the next wave of disaster was beginning to approach. Since the epicenter of the earthquake was undersea, a tsunami followed afterwards, reaching up to the heights of 40 meters or 130 feet. The tsunami and the earthquake shut down the surrounding electricity grid, which resulted in insufficient cooling for 3 nuclear reactors in Fukushima, causing 3 nuclear meltdowns. Radioactive containments were then exposed to the surrounding environment, to the extent that this event was labelled as the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1989. It's bad enough to have any one of these three things happen alone, but to occur all within 24 hours is unprecedented, and most of the destruction was caused by the tsunami, ripping and destroying everything in its path. The nuclear discharge of radioactive water flooded the surrounding areas and into the ocean. I can't help but notice the significance of water as a theme in Your Name. Miyamizu Mitsuha means sacred water 3 leaves, and Tachibana Taki means standing flower waterfall, literally in the kanji. Both names have water references. Both leaves and flowers need water to flourish. Both Taki and Yotsuha, who experienced the Miyamizu dreams after drinking Kuchikamizake, both state as though they feel like they're submerged in water, sinking but also floating. Whilst water can flow, it can also crash. It can allow things to nourish, but it can also cause things to perish. And for 311, as of 2024 figures, there have been 19,759 deaths, 6,242 injured, and 2,553 missing. In total, 28,554 people have directly been impacted. But all of these people had mothers, fathers, siblings, children, neighbours, colleagues. Overall, 340,000 people were displaced and the world was stunned. Shinkai was so moved that he visited 2 cities in Miyagi Prefecture, Natori and Yuriage, which were areas heavily impacted by the 311 events. This is one of the sketches of the area he did, which he sympathised heavily with since he too was from a similar rural town. He saw the parallels of Natori city and his hometown of Komi in Nagano. Like Taki, he would draw sketches at his desk. Like Teshi, he would stare out the window, and like Mitsuha, wished to get out of the rural countryside and into the big city like Tokyo. In Itomori, you can see the Nagano references via the Komi station here, but mainly with Lake Suwa, which heavily influenced the Itomori lake. Suwa also has a famous shrine just like Itomori. Shinkai ultimately put himself in the shoes of those who lived in the disaster zone, and that translates to Your Name, and for us the audience. We're put in Mitsuha's and Taki's shoes throughout the whole movie, and it's this level of intimacy that makes us personally connected to the movie. In Suzume, Shinkai's latest animation film, he's further inspired by these natural disasters and visualizes them as physical beings, like monsters to subdue and essentially things we must overcome. The end of Your Name centers us back to Tokyo though, and not much is revealed about what happens to Itomori after the fall of the comet or if the town rebuilds itself. It almost seems like the disaster of the comet is presented as a liberating force that allows the people of Itomori to escape the small towns and its customs. Furthermore, Teshi, who was going to inherit the construction business and envisioned changing Itomori for the better, and Taki, who is studying architecture, both really wanted to protect and improve Itomori. The same goes for Toshiki too. Yet, despite all their efforts, Itomori simply gets destroyed by a divine disaster anyway, and they all end up living in Tokyo, the end. Despite Your Name's eventual happy ending, it seems to downplay the larger causes and controversies that linger behind these actual historic events. The biggest question that remains is whether the film actually empowers the victims of these natural disasters and the citizens of these shrinking regions. Like the dragon folklore story where the Kumihimo threads overcome the sky dragon being a metaphor for human connections overcoming disasters, maybe the whole narrative of Your Name is not revolved around places but around the people themselves. On the contrary, Shinkai then expresses concerns for Tokyo itself. Taki 8 years later in a job interview states he wants to create buildings that give warmth because we don't know if Tokyo will one day fall too. Not just in Your Name but in all of Shinkai's works, you can see the heavy influence of Tokyo. In his words, sometimes when you draw out and animate everyday landscapes, can you then see the beauty of things you're used to? And Your Name heavily took influence from the Tokyo scenery. Many photographs of Tokyo were taken as reference points, as you can see here with Yotsuha Station and the outside of Taki's Tokyo apartment. And I think this is partly why the movie personally touches us. The landscapes used are literally from real life, and even if you haven't been to Tokyo or Japan, you can get the sense as if you're really there in Shinkai's films, especially in Your Name. The realism in the landscapes neatly juxtaposes the unreal, extraordinary circumstances Taki and Mitsuha face in the comet falling. In a way, Shinkai, through his films, creates time capsules of Japan, and in Your Name he does this for both the countryside and the city. His films are a way of preserving Japan in a point in time. People outside of Japan often admire their uniquely high standards of preservation and their stoic outlook on life. But why is preservation of traditions and history for Japan so important, and why is stoicism so deeply embedded into Japanese culture? Well, it's because every 100 years or so, Japan is confronted with a cataclysmic event in which many people pass, places and buildings are wiped out, and land is completely destroyed. When this kind of devastation becomes recurring, the mentality of the survivors adapts. So, why is Japan so prone to these devastating natural disasters, mainly earthquakes and tsunamis? Well, Japan is an island nation and sits between multiple tectonic plates. If you're not familiar with tectonic plates, they're basically large pieces of land that make up the Earth's outer crust. Underneath all that crust is magma and lava. There's loads of plates across the world, as you can see here. For example, in the UK where I live, we sit in the middle of a tectonic plate, which means there's a super low chance of any earthquakes even happening, because earthquakes only occur at the edges of these plates. But for Japan, they don't just sit in between 1 or 2 plates, but 4 tectonic plates. When any 2 of these plates grind against each other after decades, one will eventually go under significant pressure, enough for it to snap back into its original position. These plates, for example, move 9 centimeters per year. With 4 plates in the area, the chances of these plates snapping is extremely likely. And the location where the tectonic plate snaps is also crucial. When a plate snaps back into position, it causes an earthquake, and if that earthquake's epicenter is under the sea, then the tectonic plate is going to snap up the water above it as well, resulting in a tsunami. Since Japan is an island nation, the chances of an earthquake followed by a tsunami is also super likely, essential 2 natural disasters in one instance. In Japan's history, there's also been great fires that have occurred after the earthquake, which caused even more destruction. One example is the 1923 Kanto earthquake, which caused a great fire and resulted in 142,000 casualties, including Tokyo. You can see the similarities with Itomori's Great Fire, but also the concern for preserving Tokyo, as it too is not void from being destroyed. Again, there is a parallel which evokes the idea that no matter where you live, the countryside or the city, you cannot escape the divine disasters that befall Japan. As you can see here, natural disasters have occurred throughout Japan's history. We only have records for the past 2 millennia, but every 100 years or so, a large-scale natural disaster similar to the size of 3/11, as we previously discussed, will occur. 3/11 impacted 340,000 people and cost 503 billion USD as of 2024 valuation. We can even mention Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II as an example of people, buildings and land being completely wiped out in an instant. This level of loss, emotionally, physically and financially, occurring every 100 years or so, would then etch into Japan's history itself, its philosophy and way of life. Ironically, only from being destroyed like this over millennia do you build a mentality and national ethos with a unique preservation of traditions. So what does that all really mean? In your name, despite all the efforts of the Itomori citizens of Taki, Mitsuha, Teshi, Sayaka and Toshiki, Itomori still gets completely wiped out and the survivors simply relocate to Tokyo. However, even though Itomori is no more, it's remembered by its survivors and by its millennia-long history and traditions. Itomori is preserved as part of Japan's history, having its own anniversary date, its own memorial site, and dedicated records for people to remember. This reflects the real-life experiences of Japan for the 1923 Kanto earthquake and 2011's 3/11. You can watch your name without deeply getting into it. You can simply get lost in the beautiful animation and love story, or you can look a little closer and see all the hidden meanings inside the story like we've discussed. But through Taki and Mitsuha's body switching, do we, the audience, experience what they experience? Like Taki and Mitsuha, we too are chasing after something, our own destiny, our own dreams, and we need hope and belief to catch what we're chasing. Shinkai furthermore wants to put us in the shoes of the heroes and the victim of an extraordinary divine natural disaster to make us do one thing: feel. And that's what the movie is all about. It's about the understanding and sympathy we have for one another because we are human. It's the collective group effort we have with one another, with nature and with the rest of the world. It's what we know about each other and what we've yet to learn about each other. We're intertwined without knowing, connected because we're human. How else can people from across the world with their own cultures and languages connect together via the same story? We grieve the same, bleed the same, love the same, and hurt the same. But only together can we be human. You can't be human alone. And for us to get to know one another, and for someone to get to know you, well, I guess that starts with your name.